Hello everyone, I'm Richard Martin, a very proud FSU fan and alum, class of 1997. Now, many of you have seen other videos that I have posted over the past 2 years about conference realignment here on YouTube, and it goes without saying that I am in the camp of FSU fans and alums that do not like our current conference affiliation and desire a move elsewhere. And with the defection of Maryland coming up in the near future, this intense dislike of all things ACC has heated up among many of the Seminole faithful. However, in the past few days, something actually struck me as I was having a conversation with a friend of mine about conference realignment, and I began to focus very intently on the number 24. Now, there are many in the Big 12 camp, Big 12 fans in fact, that are pretty fired up that Bob Bowlesby and other leadership members in the Big 12 Conference are sitting idly by as the Big Ten gobbles up some of the ACC, which most assuredly, if the Big Ten takes any more ACC schools, then the SEC will most assuredly have to react to that, leaving the Big 12 with, shall we say, more of the less desirable ACC schools as leftovers. However, I actually have thought out what I believe to be a surefire way to save off any further Big Ten expansion into the more lucrative television markets of the Southeast, which will in turn ward off any further SEC expansion, thereby saving all college football fans any further worries about conference realignment for probably the next 20 to 30 years. And it is a very simple solution. Create a new conference called the Big 24. Now, to do this would require dissolving the current Big 12 and ACC conferences. And basically, these two conferences would merge into one massive conference called the Big 24. So how this would work is the Big 12 conference would be completely and totally dissolved, and the Big 12 commissioner, Mr. Bob Bowlesby, featured here, would actually become the commissioner of the Big 24 Western Division. So he would be the new commissioner for the Western Division. The ACC, likewise, would also dissolve. All 14 members would dissolve, and the ACC Commissioner, John Swofford, would be the commissioner of the Big 24 East Division. So the Big 24 would have two commissioners, one for each division. Now that the Big 12 and ACC have been dissolved, the Big 24 can split into two divisions, an Eastern Division and a Western Division. And within each division, there will be two subdivisions. In the Eastern Division, the two subdivisions would be the Northeast Subdivision and the Southeast Subdivision, respectively. And the teams in the Northeast Subdivision are Boston College, Duke, UNC Chapel Hill, Syracuse, the University of Virginia, and Virginia Tech. The other half of the Eastern Division is the Southeast Subdivision, and the Southeast Subdivision teams would include Clemson, Florida State University, Georgia Tech, Miami, NC State, and Wake Forest. And now moving into the Western Division, let's take a look at the subdivision of the Northwest Subdivision. The teams in the Northwest Subdivision are Iowa State, Kansas, Kansas State, Louisville, Pitt, and West Virginia. And the last half of the Western Division, the Southwest Subdivision, let's take a look at these teams. And they are Baylor, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Texas, TCU, and Texas Tech. Now that we've kind of showed you the divisions of the Big 24 and the subdivisions of the Big 24, this particular graphic kind of shows you a national picture of what the Big 24 conference would look like, where each one of those stars on the screen represents one of the universities in the Big 24 conference. Now, as you can see from this graphic, the Big 24 conference spans a rather large area, which would actually overlap both the SEC and the Big Ten, which are currently the two most prominent, most respected, and probably the most lucrative athletic conferences in our nation. So the Big 24 would actually overlap those two conferences, which, in my personal opinion, I don't know that much about television contracts and everything like that, but I do think that by looking at this, if this one conference overlaps both of the other ones, I do believe that it may even force the SEC and the Big Ten to actually kind of take a bigger picture of themselves and try to, yeah, I guess maybe do better marketing or what have you, because if they're having to compete against a conference that spans 2 time zones and 4 subdivisions and some of the largest states in the nation in terms of population, I think that this would dramatically calm down any particular aspect of future conference realignment. And furthermore, because the Big 24 would actually be broken down into subdivisions, the whole argument that people have about travel expenses would be dramatically cut back. For example, if you look at the Southeast Division, which, of course, me being an FSU alum, my university would be placed in there, FSU would be in the same subdivision as Clemson, Georgia Tech, Miami, NC State, and Wake Forest. And so all of those universities, FSU would play every single year. And of course, FSU would only have to play one university from the Northwest, Southwest, and Northeast Division for conference play. And either that would be a home game or an away game, depending on which year in rotation it is. So, same thing with the Northeast. You have Boston College, Duke, UNC, Syracuse, UVA, and Virginia Tech. Those all would play each other every year. The Northwest, Iowa State, Kansas, Kansas State, Louisville, Pittsburgh, and West Virginia. That is a little bit more spread out, but nonetheless, it is much more condensed, especially for poor little West Virginia, that's had to play all over the place in the Big 12. And then, of course, in the Southwest, you have Baylor, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Texas, TCU, and Texas Tech. All of them would play each other, and of course, they're only in 2 states, so it really helps them out as well. So it becomes much more regionalized, and the travel expenses and travel costs are dramatically reduced, at least in terms of football. And then, of course, if you do divisional alignments in other sports or something like that, you would keep this or however you want to do that. But nonetheless, it allows for not only a national presence, but also regional presence in terms of scheduling and travel costs. So how would scheduling actually work in the Big 24 conference? It's rather simple. If you look at this particular graphic, each team plays all teams in their subdivision, which totals 5 particular games. If you think there's 6 teams in each subdivision, and one team has to play the other 5, so there's your 5 games within your subdivision. And then each team will play one opponent from each of the other subdivisions. So, for example, if you're a Southeast subdivision team, you would play one team from the Northeast, one team from the Northwest, and one team from the Southwest, which would give you 3 additional games, which would give you a total of 8 conference games. So the Big 24 would only have to play 8 conference games out of having 24 members, which would continue to have or give the ability for each team to still have 4 out-of-conference games of their choosing, which, of course, for teams like Clemson and FSU, they could continue to play UF and South Carolina, which are, state rivals and are, big rivals of those universities. So it does allow for these universities to have 4 out-of-conference matchups of their choosing, however they want to span it out. And of course, with the 8 conference games and the 4 out-of-conference games, it gives you a total of 12 games being played in a given year. So as an example, using FSU's current 2013 out-of-conference schedule, if FSU was in a Big 24 conference, this is kind of what FSU's schedule would look like. The conference schedule could be Clemson, Georgia Tech, Miami, NC State, and Wake Forest, which are all subdivisional opponents. And then they would play Baylor, which was a Southwest subdivision opponent, but depending on how they drew, they could have gotten Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Texas, TCU, or Texas Tech. It just depends. Then they'd have KSU from the Northwest subdivision and Virginia Tech from the Northeast subdivision. And then, of course, based upon the 2013 out-of-conference schedule is Nevada, Bethune-Cookman, Idaho, and Florida. And, of course, I think this kind of tremendously strengthens FSU's strength of schedule, as well as some of the other universities around the perceived Big 24. I think all of us would have the opportunity to play big-name schools with high-profile football teams and so on and so forth. So this is an example of what FSU's football schedule could look like depending upon the luck of the draw with the Southwest, Northwest, and Northeast subdivision opponent that we drew. And of course, however, our athletic director and president picks out of conference opponents in the upcoming years. So the question comes to be begged is, what about Notre Dame? Since Notre Dame joined the ACC as a non-football playing member, but as a member in basically all other sports, the question comes into play, what do we do with Notre Dame? Well, my suggestion would be to drop Notre Dame, or the requirement for Notre Dame to play 5 conference games, and just have Notre Dame be required to play 4 conference games. That will be one opponent from each of the subdivisions, which would give Notre Dame one extra slot to be able to plug in whoever they wanted to, and this allows Notre Dame to fill her 8 remaining games with rivals such as Southern Cal and Michigan and whoever else Notre Dame wants to throw in there. So it really does give Notre Dame a little bit more flexibility in terms of scheduling, but it also gets Notre Dame's presence in all of the 4 subdivision regions of the Big 24 Conference. And this graphic kind of shows you how the conference champion would be determined. Now, of course, this would require that the Big 24 Conference petition the NCAA for an extra week of play, which I don't know how that would work because I don't know all the logistics behind it, but I'm just saying this is a good idea. So basically, the first weekend of December is division championship play. So when the Big 10 and the SEC have their conference championship, the Big 24 would actually be having their subdivision championship play, where Northeast versus Southeast would play and Northwest versus Southwest divisional champions would play each other. So basically they're trying to determine who would be the Eastern champ and the Western champ. So the second week of December is conference championship play, and that would be the Eastern champ versus the Western champ. And then, of course, the championship game would host site would actually rotate from the Eastern Division and the Western Division respectively every other year. So basically in year A, Charlotte could host it, in year B, Dallas could host it, and then rotate again to Charlotte and Dallas, and so on and so forth. Now let's take a look at Big 24 marketing. If you think about the concept that conferences are trying to create these networks and whatnot, the Big 10 has one, the SEC wants one, the ACC is trying to get one. If you created a Big 24 network, I could just see by using and playing on the number 24, if you look at this graphic here, the number 24 is good if you have 24-hour access to all Big 24 sporting events that you could desire. I could just see, ad campaigns and advertisers really playing on that and really marketing that very well. And if you think about the Big 24 television footprint, the Big 24 television footprint would actually be in 6 out of the 10 most populated states in the country. If you think of Texas, New York, Florida, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and North Carolina, those are the 6 states out of the most populated, 10 most populated, that the Big 24 would have a television footprint. And if you add in the top 15, you're talking about New Jersey, Virginia, and Massachusetts on board as well. So having all of those states in your television footprint plays very, very well in creating a Big 24 network. So the Big 24 network could perceivably be very lucrative in terms of television contracts and bringing in large amounts of money for all of the universities involved. And furthermore, also continuing play on the number 24, the Big 24 spans 2 time zones and has 4 subdivisions. So once again, that's another unique and creative way that the Big 24 can play on its namesake, the Big 24 Conference. Also, you have the idea that there's no longer the Big 12 with only 10 members in it, so now everything works out in terms of numbers. But I do believe that the Big 24, just by the sheer size of it, has the capability of renegotiating a massive television contract for all of the universities involved within the Big 24 Conference. So I think it could be very lucrative. Let's take a look at Big 24 academics. This is another thing that conference commissioners and university presidents look at in terms of conference expansion. Out of the Big 24 schools, 8 of them are AAU members: Duke, Georgia Tech, Iowa State, Kansas, UNC, Pittsburgh, Texas, and University of Virginia. 20, if you actually included Notre Dame, would be ranked in the top 150 of American research universities according to the Center for Measuring University Performance in 2011. And out of those rankings for the top 150 American research universities, this right here shows you what the rankings are for Big 24 institutions. You have Pittsburgh at number 11, Duke at number 12, UNC at number 13, Georgia Tech 22, Texas 24, UVA 44, Miami 53, Virginia Tech 58, Wake Forest at number 60, NC State at number 62, FSU at 71, Iowa State 83, Kansas 100, Louisville 101, West Virginia 107, Kansas State 111, Notre Dame 112, Clemson 116, Oklahoma 130, and Oklahoma State 134. One of the big selling points that the Big Ten has for all of its members is the fact that it's a part of that consortium, that academic consortium that they all are members of, except for Nebraska, which got kicked out when they joined for whatever reason. I would propose that the Big 24 universities do the same thing. If the Big Ten is going to tout that, then by God Almighty, let the Big 24, which is basically the Big 12 and the ACC, they come together. The ACC and the Big 12 have some powerful and very prestigious academic universities, so why not bridge that gap and bring all 24 universities together into a consortium of Big 24 members, where there's full cooperation and transfer of even credits among and between the universities. There's preferential research for Big 24 members, so if there's a big research topic coming up at Clemson or Texas or Kansas, then obviously those other university professors will seek out other Big 24 members to pool their resources and whatnot between their members before they start searching out and so on and so forth. Professors could do joint research between Big 24 members, and grant money would be shared on joint projects. So there could be a joint project between FSU and Virginia Tech, or FSU and Iowa State, depending on what the research topic is, and the grant money could be used by both universities. So both universities get credit, both universities get the research that they need, and they get the money that they need. So you're talking about probably, perceivably, billions and billions of dollars, probably even more, over the Big Ten in this perspective. And last but not least, we'll briefly talk about Big 24 basketball, and I will admit I'm an FSU fan and alumni. We do not play basketball. I know we're doing pretty well in the past few years, but that's just wrong on so many levels, because I just don't think we should be playing basketball that well, but that's just me. I'm a big football person. But nonetheless, basketball is a revenue-making sport in many regards and for many universities. But because there's 24 members, and basically since Notre Dame would also be a member of the Big 24, there'd be 25 members. Each team plays each other only once, since Notre Dame, being a member of the old ACC for basketball, would join the conference as a basketball member. And therefore, each conference member would play 24 conference games, because you just play each member one time. And then, of course, that allows the university to hold a regional tournament if they want to, east or west. They could actually hold northeast and northwest, however they wanted to do their tournaments. Or there could be one big conference tournament, however the athletic directors and the university presidents and the conference commissioners, since there would be two, decide on how the conference tournament for basketball should happen. And of course, since you span 6 out of the 10 largest states in terms of population, it could be housed in any one of those major states, and you would get a good large viewing and a large turnout, more than likely, for a basketball tournament in any one of those states that you hosted it in, out of the 6 of the largest states in population. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, my proposed idea for a new conference called the Big 24, where basically you merge the Big 12 and the ACC into one enormous conference. And I think I kind of sort of proved my point here. I think it would dramatically slow down, if not altogether cease, conference expansion altogether, because the universities in the ACC that are probably looking elsewhere would find value in merging with the Big 12, because you get that football presence with Texas and Oklahoma schools, but you also get the basketball preference with the Kansas schools and things like that. So you're catering to both pockets in the ACC, the football schools and the basketball schools, so you're getting the best of both worlds. You also would actually span, like I said, 2 time zones. You'd have 4 subdivisions. It spans itself out very nicely in terms of academics, because you have a ton of universities that are in the top 150. You have 8 universities that are member of the AAU. You could create your own consortium for academics that would rival the Big Ten, and actually could potentially make them angry. You have 6 out of the 10 largest states in terms of population in your television footprint, which the other states do not have. The SEC has some, the Big Ten has some, but I think the Big 24 television network, by 24-hour access for all Big 24 athletic events, plays very nicely in terms of marketing and advertising. And I think that the Big 24 television network would actually be something that would rival the Big Ten network and the SEC network when it comes online, because let's face it, it's going to come online. And eventually, the Big 24, I do believe that with the universities that you have in terms of academics as well as athletics, would eventually be able to take over in terms of power and prestige over any of the Big 10 or SEC schools in terms of athletic performance as well as academic performance. So I think it's a win-win in both situations. But I look forward to any comments that you guys may have about it. But I figured that would just be one way to help completely end all of the conference expansion and all the nightmares that we're going through right now in terms of college athletics. And the last thing that I want to point out is that, once the ACC and the Big 12 are dissolved, we could get rid of the whole $50 million exit fee that the ACC has, and basically the Big 24 could pool itself into a grant of rights scenario like the Big 12 had, which I think would also further solidify the Big 24 as a conference. And again, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope it made some sense, and I look forward to any comments that you guys may have. Thanks a lot. See ya.